This episode contains distressing themes including suicide and disordered eating. For 24/7 support, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. You'll find some links to more resources in today's episode description. From viral weight loss drug to Hollywood punchline.
When I look around this room, I can't help but wonder, is Ozempic right for me?
Once touted as the breakthrough medication that could end type 2 diabetes, Ozempic has exploded in popularity, taking social media by storm as a so-called miracle drug.
This group of drugs for diabetic control have been around for quite a while. Ozempic, however, when it came out, was the one that had this significant profile for weight loss.
Over the past 2 episodes, we've explored the world of weight loss medications, GLP-1s like Ozempic, Wegovy and Mounjaro, to understand how they work and their impact on young Australians, like Grace.
The mobility is insane. The change of perspective is enormous.
And Mackenzie.
I was in such a bad place that he suggested I go to hospital, stop taking it immediately.
We've explored topics like ethics and health, as well as the world of online prescribing. This time, for our final episode, we'll dive deeper into the social ramifications of weight loss medications. From the lengths that people go to get them.
People will sometimes aim to deceive, and it's harder to unmask in the online environment than it is in the face-to-face environment.
To how they're being talked about on social media.
Later on at night, before I'm going to bed, I'm like, why don't I look like that? And those thoughts are popping up, and they haven't for a long time.
From the Daily Aus, I'm Emma Gillespie, and this is Investigating Ozempic, Part 3. Around 1 in 5 Australians over the age of 15 are significantly affected by something called body dissatisfaction. That's according to recent data from national eating disorder charity, the Butterfly Foundation. Body dissatisfaction is a term that describes the negative feelings and thoughts a person might have about their physical appearance. The Butterfly Foundation warns body dissatisfaction is a key risk factor for the development of, quote, many types of eating disorders, along with other conditions such as anxiety, depression, substance use, and smoking. Experts say it stems from a perceived discrepancy between an individual's ideal state of appearance and their actual physical appearance. In other words, a difference in how you might want to look versus how you might actually look. The concept of body dissatisfaction is nothing new, but there is a distinct and unique relationship between contemporary beauty standards and the prevalence of social media. Youth mental health advocate Varsha Yajman says the popularity of Ozempic speaks to a harmful trend-based cycle around appearance and shape.
Thinness is definitely back in, and it feels like the entire body positivity, body neutrality movement has almost had this regression where it's like, oh, no, we're actually back to those sizes that we were trying to get away from. And here's a drug that's going to fix everything. In New York, the average size in a store has decreased, like the sizes on the racks. And I think that just goes to show the impact it's actually having on individuals. And even now when you go to a lot of stores, you'll see that the biggest size that they have in stock sometimes will be a medium.
The so-called age of Ozempic has been blamed for a slump in demand for larger sizes. A 2025 report by Vogue Business analysed the size diversity of models across recent global fashion weeks. It found plus-sized representation dropped to 0.3%, down from 0.8% in 2024. Mid-size representation, so that's models between Australian sizes 10 to 16, decreased from 4.3% in 2024 to 2% this year.
It's not just the use of Ozempic, but all the other factors around it as well that are telling women especially that they need to be a certain size.
Varsha is also concerned about how these drugs are being promoted online.
We're talking about how these celebrities' bodies have changed and it's making headlines everywhere. The comments will just be filled with, you're doing Ozempic, you're taking Ozempic. It's Ozempic. I think there's 2 kinds of conversations happening right now. One is that celebrities don't owe us anything. They're under the same pressures, if not more pressure, being the limelight. And then there's the other conversation where it's like, no, but a lot of people look up to these celebrities, especially young women.
Butterfly Foundation spokesperson Melissa Wilton told the Daily Aus that the kind of focus on weight that we're seeing with medications like Ozempic can intensify body dissatisfaction, feelings of shame, and contribute to the development or continuation of an eating disorder. Varsha Yajman, who has lived experience with an eating disorder, echoes these concerns and warns there's a dark side to the increased visibility of these drugs.
I think the really interesting thing about Ozempic, or even when I think of Botox and filler, at one point it seemed like only the rich or the celebrities had access to it. And now all of a sudden, that issue isn't there anymore. It's almost like your everyday person has access to it. And I think that's where the fear is, that it's fully just infiltrated our normal day-to-day lives. The person at the gym that you normally see is now on it and, has this new transformation that everyone's raving about. And I think that's been the biggest worry.
Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and other GLP-1 medications may be relatively new, but this fixation Varsha describes is not.
Now people can look to the internet, and before they looked other places, they looked to supermodels and women's magazines and mail order pills and those kinds of things.
That's Dr. Emma Beckett, food and nutrition scientist and adjunct senior lecturer at UNSW. She warns the current diet culture is amplifying a covert type of fat phobia,
where assumptions are made about fat people, and they're not necessarily said out loud, but they're thought, and they change the way that people think of people in larger bodies. And then that has a knock-on effect to how they treat them and the opportunities that they give them. So it really is quite damaging. And when you think about these kinds of spirals of consequence of the way we're made to feel about our bodies and not value our bodies, and then the consequence of how that causes us to treat our bodies and the extreme weight loss, the extreme diets that people attempt, then that just further harms our biology.
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the two-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
While Ozempic is no longer a Hollywood secret, Dr. Beckett warns there are still equity issues associated with accessing these drugs, like cost. Right now, Australians who take GLP-1s for weight loss are spending upwards of $400 a month to do so. Affordability was a key concern flagged by TDA's audience in a recent Ozempic call-out on our Instagram. Another consistent theme our audience brought up was the social media debate around the ethics of who should or shouldn't be taking Ozempic, and how these conversations might be being unfairly thrust upon people who don't want to have them.
And I think that's what's happening right now with the weight conversation, with all of the judgment that comes around with do you or don't you take this medication, all of the judgment that comes around what did you eat, what did you do to deserve it, how did you create this for yourself, why are you the problem?
Dr. Beckett says that as weight loss medications have become more prominent, so too has a cultural divide between the way we judge good fat and bad fat.
The good fat people are the ones who try with diet and exercise, and they do the effort, whereas the bad ones are the ones that cheat and use this drug. And the kind of tutting you hear when people talk about the people who have lost weight and kept it off in this way. Some people love it because it cuts out the noise that comes with food. For some people, first time they've ever been not hungry in their lives. For other people, it ruins their relationship with food and they have no appetite, or they might feel very sick.
She argues Ozempic has created a situation that's essentially impossible to win. In her words, that it's no longer just fat versus thin or body positive versus fat phobia.
If you take this drug, you are frowned on for cheating and stealing it from diabetics. If you don't take this drug, then you're frowned on for not taking the options that are available to you, because there's a group of people who will say, well, obesity is a disease, you should take your medication. And it just makes it more divisive.
Both Dr. Emma Beckett and Varsha Yajman describe this idea of pervasive shame being born out of diet culture. But how does that shame cross over into the way people access healthcare? Since the pandemic, virtual and telehealth providers have become a fixture of the national healthcare system. It means more options for Australians and more flexibility. This extends to the way Ozempic and other GLP-1s are prescribed. Patients have the choice. Do they want to access medication through a face-to-face GP consult or go the telehealth route? But with that added convenience comes new concerns.
If these people have started these companies to deliberately sell these weight loss drugs, that says there's a gap. That says when people are going to the doctor and having this conversation with their regular GP, they're not getting what they need.
People like Gabby, who decided to go down the virtual care path after hearing about Juniper from a former colleague.
She was on it and loving it and stuff.
Juniper is the virtual health provider we spoke about on episode 2.
And yeah, just convinced me, I guess, to look into it. I looked up Juniper online and then filled out the questionnaire kind of thing, which started with height, age, weight.
Gabby was 24 at the time.
According to the classic BMI system, I was technically overweight, technically in the realm to be qualified for it, but for some reason I still lied about being a bit heavier.
Body mass index, or BMI, is a traditional diagnostic tool used to measure obesity. As we mentioned in the last episode, it's a metric used by healthcare providers across the board. However, questions about its relevance and accuracy have emerged in recent years. According to findings from a global commission handed down this year, BMI is unreliable as a measure to diagnose obesity when used on its own. The Butterfly Foundation said it rejects the concept of weight or BMI as an indicator of health and said our society has a very narrow view around health, often attributing it to thin or muscular body shapes in the absence of other indicators that may or may not be realistic. All that being said, BMI does remain widely used by healthcare providers and GPs, including Juniper, which uses the metric to screen patients. After completing the online questionnaire, Gabby spoke on the phone to a Juniper doctor who told her,
"You might experience some vomiting, you might get constipated." It was more just physical side effects, not the mental side effects.
She received a prescription for weight loss medication shortly thereafter. Now 26, Gabby said she lied about how she was progressing to Juniper to ensure they would continue prescribing medication to her. Lies that Gabby claims were easy to get away with, and which experts acknowledge can be a common sign of disordered eating behaviours.
Super easy to be dishonest. At the time that I applied for it, it was. So I would say that I'd lost a lot less than I had, but I was losing it very, very, very quick. And then I just kind of became really fixated on how much weight I was losing. So I was weighing myself like 2 or 3 times a day. And it really turned into a bit more of probably an eating disorder.
Experts also say it's pretty common for patients to hide certain details from prescribers, but they argue it's up to the healthcare providers to understand what the individual is trying to achieve, why they want a drug like Ozempic and why they might lie to get it, as well as why they might choose to go through telehealth or virtual care over their regular GP.
Are they going to their standard GP and their standard GP is going, no, you don't need that? And you go to the people who are selling them directly and that's their purpose. And they go, well, of course you can have that. And so my question is about how do we look at that context?
I've got no problem with understanding that some people are sensitive about why they might want to talk to a GP about issues of their health or weight.
That's Sydney GP and AMA Public Health Chair, Dr. Michael Bonning.
We have clinical experience as doctors. You're often able to intuit why someone might be sitting in front of you for this, even if some of the things they say to you might be trying to obfuscate what the actual reason is. And that's pretty common. Lots of people don't come in and tell us the whole story. That's okay. That's their prerogative. It's a challenge that's harder to unmask in the online environment than it is in the face-to-face environment.
With GPs like Dr. Bonning conceding telehealth services present unique challenges for prescribers, where does that leave services like Juniper, who currently engage registered nurses to prescribe GLP-1s? For Gabby, who takes ownership of her dishonesty, these online providers could solve many issues by conducting video calls with patients.
So they can actually physically see it's you and physically see what you're claiming to say you are. I know people who have submitted photos and tried to Photoshop them to these platforms. So I haven't personally done that, but I do know of people who have just been like, oh, well, it's fine. I'll just put like a fat filter on.
Dr. Emma Beckett says while it might be tempting to say, let's get rid of these telehealth companies, that's not the solution.
Our regular GPs need to do better about weight because so many people are scared of going to the doctor because they're going to get picked on about their weight, because they're going to get judgment about their weight.
That judgment, she argues, risks isolating already vulnerable patients further. Instead, the conversations people are having with their doctors should be centred around tailored advice and improved support, she says.
I'm looking at the whole ecosystem and saying, what could we be doing better here? We need big picture solutions. We can't just keep putting out fires and fighting amongst ourselves because that's obviously not getting us anywhere.
So where do we start?
Most GPs don't have a lot of training in nutrition. And one of the things we could be doing better would be giving more people access to dietitians, the people who are trained to do medical nutrition therapy. And most people don't access dietitians because they think they're only for sick people. Making nutrition advice more accessible could actually solve a lot of these problems because people then could learn how to make decisions for themselves in a way that works for them instead of just getting population level advice and going, why am I failing?
As a young woman living in recovery from an eating disorder, Varsha Yajman holds concerns about how other young people are internalising the constant messages they're seeing about weight loss medications.
When I'm watching a lot of content or I'm scrolling for a long time, later on at night before I'm going to bed, I'm like, oh, like, why don't I look like that? And those thoughts are popping up and they haven't for a long time. So I can imagine somebody who's far more vulnerable, who hasn't had that sort of help and those resources to be thinking thinness is back. I need to be achieving that. And even when you're in recovery, there's so many things around, oh, I'm going to gain some weight, but not too much weight because I still need to fit the standard.
If the healthcare system needs to do more and do better, Varsha says so too do social media platforms. She doesn't think blanket bans will do much, but rather that content regulation is critical.
This type of content is going to be there. So it's about how we regulate that content. And I don't necessarily think that banning any of these platforms is going to solve anything, but actually making sure that social media platforms who have billions of dollars to actually use resources, create resources for people who are vulnerable to the content on there. And also the government has a role to play. That idea of a duty of care, of holding social media companies accountable is incredibly important. And I think this also comes with having more literacy, and this means having education in schools.
The experts you've heard from over the last 3 episodes have detailed an uphill battle to improve the physical and emotional well-being of Australians. They've described systemic, long-term and pervasive shortcomings across healthcare, social media, pop culture, education and beyond. But Dr. Beckett says things can change.
One thing that I see a lot currently is the younger generation thinks the solution is to not talk about weight. That weight is a taboo topic. If we make it taboo, then we just set up a whole extra set of standards and assumptions. And so we've got this double standard about what we focus on and what we talk about. It can't just be, we wish diet culture wasn't there, it's making things hard. We have to actively have the conversations that say, is this a diet culture moment and how do we resist that? And, you know, the only way we fix that is by having better conversations. Let's talk about what we can do as a society together to help people be in the position to make the choices that work for them in their bodies and their lives.
As experts and advocates continue to push for important conversations and safer practices, a growing number of young people are trying to figure out what their long-term relationship with drugs like Ozempic will look like.
It's definitely fully unlocked something new. I've lost like probably 20 kilos. I don't feel any better than I did prior. My whole life I was comfortable and like confident in who I was and everything, and couldn't really be further from that now. I spend like $300 a month on the medication and now you spend like $500 a month on therapy. It's an expensive lesson, you know.
Some will be on GLP-1s for life. For others, the financial or physical toll will be simply too great. But for the many Australians, like Gabby, who sits somewhere in the middle, the future remains uncertain.
I'd be lying if I said I didn't still really tightly moderate what I eat. You know, I weigh myself every single day. Yeah, it's been really hard on the other side of it. And it's really hard to, I guess, I don't want to say the word relapse because it's not like it's a illicit drug or something, but it's true. It's really hard to kind of not try and just go back on it. I'm still really scared of putting it back on. So I guess I would love to have a supply, but I can't afford it. And I know how bad it is for my mental health, but it is definitely a battle.
Thank you so much for listening to part 3. That wraps up our series investigating Ozempic. We hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you did, it would mean so much if you could share it with a friend, leave us a review, subscribe and follow wherever you're listening. It really helps us get the word out so that we can keep making more original investigations into the future. If this episode raised any issues or concerns for you, help is available 24/7 through Lifeline on 13 11 14. For eating disorder support, you can contact the Butterfly Foundation on 1-800-ED-HOPE. That's 1-800-33-4673.